Your Honor, the defense table speaks for itself. It is empty. Even his own attorney stopped believing him. Mr. Kingston, do you have anything further at all?
Only my word, Your Honor. I built it. All of it.
His word! The court cannot bank a word, sweetheart.
Should have taken the settlement, old man. I'll keep your name in the lobby as a souvenir.
Dad, I'm here.
Sweetheart, no, I told you not to come.
You also told me family shows up. Pick one. And who is this supposed to be? I'm his daughter, Your Honor. And I'm appearing for the defense.
Have you ever watched someone underestimate the wrong person at the worst possible moment? Because the lawyers at that table just dismissed the one woman who could destroy them. And in the next few minutes, you will watch a single leather file turn a guaranteed win into handcuffs. Comment where you are watching from, drop a like, and let us rewind. 17 years before that leather case ever landed on a courtroom table, Solomon Kingston was a widower with cracked hands, a second-hand pickup, and a whole company that still fit inside a single toolbox. Solomon had started with nothing anybody would envy. He laid brick. He hung drywall in other men's houses he could not have rented a room in. His wife, Josephine, had died young, of a cancer that took 18 fast months and every dollar they had saved. And it left Solomon, a 36-year-old man with a contractor's license, a broken heart, and no reason on earth to keep getting up before dawn. But he got up. Because Josephine's last clear sentence to him had been build something that outlasts you, baby. And Solomon Kingston was not a man who let a promise go cold. So he built, one kitchen remodel at a time, then 2 crews, then a company. He paid his men first and himself last. He learned to read blueprints and then to read contracts, and then, the hard way, to read people. Kingston Construction became Kingston Development, became the Kingston Group. And by the time the city skyline had 3 towers with his name in the lobby stone, Solomon Kingston was worth more money than the boy laying brick could have counted in a lifetime. But that is not the part he was proud of. This is on a freezing Tuesday in December, 17 years ago, driving home late from a job site. Solomon stopped at a gas station on the edge of the city and saw a little girl sitting alone on the curb by the ice machine. 10 years old. No coat worth the name. A grocery bag of everything she owned. She was not crying. That was what undid him. The way she was not crying. The way she had already learned that crying did not bring anybody. Her mother had died in a shelter that autumn. The system had a bed for her somewhere across the county, and no one to drive her to it that night. Solomon Kingston, who knew exactly what it felt like to sit still while the world decided your worth, crouched down in front of that little girl on the freezing curb. And he did not tower over her. And he asked her name. Hella. She whispered. "That's a beautiful name," he said. "You like pancakes?" Hella. He bought her dinner at an all-night diner and did not once look at his watch. He made calls. He filled out forms. He hired lawyers to give something away for once. His own quiet life. In exchange for a daughter. The adoption took 11 months, and every ounce of patience he had. Hallie Kingston came home for good the following November. and Solomon repainted his guest room the exact shade of yellow she pointed to in the store. And he learned to braid hair from a video. Badly. And then less badly. And the towers with his name on them stopped being the thing that mattered most in his life. He raised her on Josephine's sentence. Build something that outlasts you. He taught her that a handshake is a contract your soul signs. He sat in the front row at every spelling bee, every debate final, every graduation. A big, quiet man crying openly and not caring who saw. When Hallie said, at 15, that she wanted to be a lawyer because she was tired of watching people with money bully people without it. Solomon Kingston put her through the best schools in the country and never once told her the other reason he was proud, which was that she had chosen to spend her life doing to bullies what no one had been able to do for either of them. And into that life, 11 years ago, walked Grayson Fairchild. Fairchild was everything. Solomon was not young, polished, ivy pedigreed, white teeth, and a wardrobe that cost what Solomon's first house had. He came in as a junior partner on the finance side, and he called Solomon Sir with just enough warmth that it took the old man 3 years to notice the warmth never reached the eyes. Fairchild made himself useful. He made himself necessary. He restructured the debt, courted the investors, learned where every document in the company lived, and, crucially, where the old man's trust had no lock on it. Solomon Kingston had built an empire by believing a handshake was a contract. It was the most beautiful thing about him. It was also, Grayson Fairchild had decided over 11 patient years, the exact seam where the whole thing could be torn open. And so, 6 months before that courtroom, Fairchild made his move. He filed suit, claiming that the founding intellectual property of the Kingston Group, the proprietary building system that had made the towers possible, had been his invention all along, developed on his time. Stolen by Solomon and stamped with the Kingston name, he produced contracts. He produced dated design files. He produced a signature, Solomon's signature, on a partnership agreement the old man swore on Josephine's grave he had never signed. It was a lie built like a building, one forged floor at a time, and it was very, very well built. To argue it, Fairchild hired the sharpest and most expensive litigator in the state. Blair Cabot was white, beautiful in a cold architectural way, and famous in legal circles for a talent that had nothing to do with the law. She was famous for making juries dislike the truth. She wore green like a warning label and cross-examined like a surgeon who enjoyed the cutting. And in 15 years, she had never once represented a client who could not pay her by the hour. On the first day of trial, Blair Cabot stood up in front of that packed courtroom, gestured at the tired old man at the defense table, and told a story so clean it almost sounded true. A brilliant young innovator, she said, meaning Fairchild, taken in by a charismatic older builder, meaning Solomon, and slowly robbed of his life's work by a man who understood bricks but not ideas. A man who, she said, letting her eyes travel over Solomon's fine suit like a costume, had reached a point where the truth was inconvenient to his lifestyle. My client trusted the wrong man, she told them. The question before this court is simply whether a signature means anything anymore, or whether a man can build an empire on another man's name and keep it, just because he has held it long enough to grow comfortable. She was good. She was so good that Solomon's own lawyer, a decent and overmatched man, began to shrink in his chair. She entered the forged partnership agreement into evidence and had a handwriting analyst, the kind who is paid to be certain, swear that the signature was genuine. She entered the dated design files and had a technician swear to their timestamps. brick by brick. She built the case that Solomon Kingston was a thief, and she smiled the entire time. And she called him Mr. Kingston, with a little curl on the Mr. Fairchild sat beside her through all of it, grave and wounded, the portrait of a betrayed protégé. Once, when he thought no one was watching, he leaned toward Blair and murmured something in her ear, and she smiled a private smile that had nothing to do with the law either, and let her knee rest against his under the table for exactly as long as she wanted to. Nobody in that courtroom caught it. Someone just outside of it would. By the second evening, the case had done what cases like this are engineered to do, and it had exhausted everyone on the wrong side of the money. That night, Solomon's decent, overmatched lawyer came to his hotel room, could not meet his eyes, and withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable differences, which is what lawyers say when the difference is that they have stopped believing they can win. He left his letter in a white envelope on the defense table the next morning, like flowers at a funeral. So, on the third day, the day of final arguments, Solomon Kingston sat completely alone, watching 40 years of work, and the only inheritance he had for his daughter, slide toward a man who called him a thief in a $2,000 suit. What Grayson Fairchild did not know, what he could not have known, was who Solomon Kingston had raised. On the second day, they put Solomon Kingston on the stand, and Blair Cabot took him apart. He was not a good witness, and it broke your heart precisely because of why. Solomon was an honest man, and honest men make terrible witnesses, because they answer the question that was asked, instead of the question they wish had been asked. He said yes when yes was true, even when yes looked bad. He said, "I don't recall," when he did not recall. And Blair made those 3 words sound like a confession every single time. "Mr. Kingston, is this your signature?" Solomon looked at the forged partnership agreement for a long time. It was his signature. That was the terrible genius of it. Someone had built it, letter by letter, from 100 real ones, and he could not in good conscience say the letters were wrong. "It looks like my signature," he said slowly, "but I never signed this document. I have never seen it before this lawsuit." "You never signed it." Blair let the disbelief hang. "But it looks exactly like your signature. Help the court. Mr. Kingston, did your hand sign it? Or did a ghost? I'm telling you, I did not sign that paper. You built a billion-dollar company." "Sir, but you cannot keep track of what you sign." She turned to the jury with a small, sorrowful smile. "Or is it that you sign a great many things? Take a great many things, and remember only the ones that are convenient." "Objection," said Solomon's lawyer, tiredly. "Withdrawn," said Blair, who had already spent the sentence. She walked him through 11 years of Fairchild's employment and made every act of the old man's generosity look like a cover story. The bonuses Solomon had paid, Fairchild became hush money. The trust Solomon had extended became opportunity when Solomon said, with quiet dignity, that he had treated Grayson like a son. Blair Cabot repeated the word son back to him so gently and so cruelly that the old man's voice finally cracked. Once, on the second syllable, and Grayson Fairchild looked down at the table to hide whatever was on his face. And it was not shame. There was a moment, near the end of the second day, that the news cameras outside would have paid a great deal to have caught. Blair Cabot held up an enlarged copy of one of the dated design files. The proprietary building schematic that supposedly proved Fairchild had invented the Kingston system, and asked Solomon to admit he could not even read it. This is your company's crown jewel, Mr. Kingston. Walk us through it. Show the jury the genius you are accused of stealing. And Solomon, who had laid the first brick of the first building that Schematic ever became, who had solved the load problem it described on a napkin in a diner with a 10-year-old asleep against his arm, looked at the drawing and said, simply, I could show you, but you would not believe me. And that is the whole point of this room. Blair smiled. No further use for the witness. In the gallery, the people who had come for Solomon sat in a tightening silence. His foreman, his office staff, men and women who had been hired when no one else would hire them, who had bought homes on Kingston paychecks, who knew exactly what kind of man was being dismantled at that table. A retired steelworker named Willie, who had ridden the first Kingston crew, gripped his hat in both hands and shook his head slowly, the way you do at a funeral for a man who is still in the room to watch it. Grayson Fairchild, for his part, had begun to relax. On the second afternoon, he stopped bothering to look wounded. During a recess, he was overheard by a paralegal, laughing softly near the water station, saying the old man should have retired to a beach. And Blair's low reply, we will get him one. Baby. A nice small one. And the paralegal had thought, that is a strange way for a lawyer to talk to her client, and then had thought nothing more of it. She would remember it later, when a young woman in a cream suit asked her what exactly she had heard. But here is the thing about that second day. The thing nobody in the gallery noticed except one silver-haired court reporter who had seen everything at least twice. Solomon Kingston never once got angry. He was losing everything. He was being called a thief in public by a boy he had fed and raised up and trusted, and defended by a woman who was enjoying it. And the old man sat with his hands folded and his back straight and answered every question with the same grave courtesy, because somewhere in the losing he had made a decision. And the decision was this. He would not become small in front of these people. He would not let them take his name and his dignity in the same afternoon. If the empire was going, it would leave with a man still standing inside it. And twice, only twice, in 2 days of testimony, Solomon Kingston let himself glance at the great doors at the back of the courtroom, not with hope. Exactly. He had told her not to come. That was the part no one knew. When the lawsuit landed, Hallie had been 3,000 miles away, mid-trial herself on the biggest case of her young career. And Solomon had called her and lied to his own daughter for the first and only time in 17 years. It's a nuisance, sweet. Sweetheart, my lawyers have it. Don't you dare get on a plane. Finish your case. He had lied because a father protects, even when the father is the one drowning. So he did not truly expect the doors to open. He glanced at them the way you touch a scar. And then he turned back and let Blair Cabot land another blow. And another. And the jury's faces closed 1 degree further against him. And the third day came. And the final arguments began. And the gavel rose. He did not know that 1,100 miles away, 2 nights earlier, his daughter had won her own case, walked out of her own courtroom, opened a browser on her phone, and typed her father's name. He did not know what she had found when she could not sleep. He did not know she had already been on a red-eye, already read every filing, already made 3 calls that would have made Blair Cabot's blood run cold, and was, at that precise moment, running up 4 flights of courthouse steps in a cream suit with a leather case pressed to her chest, arriving at the great doors just in time to hear a judge reach for a gavel, 60 seconds before the world her father built stopped existing. To understand what was inside that leather case, you have to know what Hallie Kingston had become. The little girl from the freezing curb had grown into the kind of lawyer other lawyers warned each other about. She had gone to the best law school in the country on merit, not money, though the money was there. And she had turned down the white shoe firms that courted her and taken a job that paid a third as much, prosecuting corporate fraud for the federal government. For 6 years, she had put men in suits into prison. Men who thought a good enough lie and an expensive enough lawyer made them untouchable. She had a particular gift. Everyone said so. For documents. For the thing hidden in the metadata. For the tiny inconsistency in a timestamp that unravels an entire forgery. Where other attorneys saw a signed contract, Hallie Kingston saw a story about who had held the pen. And when, and whether they were lying. She had just gone into private practice. She had just won her first enormous case. She was, at 27, exactly the weapon her father needed. And he had lied to her rather than pick her up and aim her. Because that was the kind of love Solomon Kingston had. The kind that would rather bleed than be a burden. She found out anyway. Of course she found out. 2 nights before the final arguments, unable to sleep in a hotel, a continent away. Hallie had done the thing her father begged her not to do. She looked up the case. And the moment she read the words Kingston Group and intellectual property and forged in the same filing, she was out of the bed and dressed. And by the time the sun came up, she had done in one night what her father's exhausted lawyer had not done in 6 months. She read every page, and then she did what she was born to do. She stopped reading the words and started reading the paper. The forged partnership agreement was dated 11 years ago. She pulled the metadata on the plaintiff's own submitted PDF. The fingerprint every file carries, and no one thinks to check. And the font embedded in that document had not been released by its designer until 4 years after the date printed at the top of the page. A signature can be forged. A memory can be disputed. But a typeface cannot sign a document years before it exists. It was small. It was technical. It was the kind of thing juries glaze over, and the kind of thing Hallie Kingston had built a career on, making impossible to glaze over. That was the first thread. She pulled 3 more before her plane landed. The dated design files Fairchild claimed as proof of his invention had been created on a company laptop. And company laptops keep logs. And the logs were subpoenable. And Hallie, who still had friends in every clerk's office in the country from her federal days, made 3 phone calls at 30,000 feet that began the quiet machinery of getting them. And there was one more thing. The thing that turned a legal case into something with a heartbeat. Buried in an old Kingston Group personnel file, digitized years ago, was a document Grayson Fairchild had almost certainly forgotten existed. Because he had signed it himself. 11 years before, on his first day of employment, a standard onboarding agreement, and in it, in plain language, in his own signature. Grayson Fairchild acknowledged that all intellectual property of the Kingston Group predated his employment and belonged solely to Solomon Kingston. He had signed away his own lie on his first day, and spent 11 years forgetting he had done it. Hallie printed everything. She organized it the way her father had taught her to stack brick. Heaviest on the bottom. Nothing wasted. Each piece bearing the weight of the next. She did not call ahead. She did not warn the court. She filed a single emergency notice of appearance as co-counsel for the defense, timed to land the morning of final arguments. And she got on a red-eye with a leather case on her lap and did not sleep. And she thought about a man crouching down on a freezing curb to ask a nobody her name. She was not coming to save an empire. Empires she could take or leave. She was coming for the man who had given her one. And she walked in on the exact right sentence. For the defense, Hallie said again, into a courtroom that had forgotten how to breathe. Judge Constance Ramsey, 62, gray and entirely unbothered by expensive suits, had presided over enough trials to know the exact difference between a stunt and an earthquake. She looked at the young woman, then at the notice of appearance her clerk quietly passed up, then over the top of her glasses at Blair Cabot. Counsel appears to have properly filed a notice of appearance for the defendant at 8 o'clock this morning. Ms. Cabot, your objection. Your Honor, this is theater. Blair was on her feet, smooth, faintly amused. The way you humor a child who has wandered onto a stage. Final arguments are not the time to parachute in some. Relative, we are prejudiced by any new participation at this hour. The defendant's counsel withdrew last night. Your Honor, and Ms. Cabot knows it. My father was about to face final arguments with an empty chair. A party is entitled to representation, and I would remind opposing counsel that prejudice runs to the party surprised by evidence, not the party surprised by competence. Hallie had not raised her voice once. I have 4 exhibits. They are already digitally filed with the clerk. Time stamped before I entered this room. The court can verify that in 90 seconds, if they are what I say they are. Your Honor, you will want them in this record before you rule. If they are not, Ms. Cabot may laugh me out of this building, and I'll hold the door. A long pause. Judge Ramsey was a careful woman, and careful people can smell when the truth has just walked into the room. I'll allow a limited presentation. Ms. Kingston. This had better not be theater. No. Your Honor, it's arithmetic, and arithmetic doesn't care how much anyone paid their lawyer. She opened the leather case, and the brass latches echoed off the marble like 2 small gavels. Defense Exhibit 1, the plaintiff's own partnership agreement. The document. Ms. Cabot entered on the first day of this trial, the one bearing my client's signature. Hallie clicked a remote, and the forged agreement bloomed on the courtroom screen. Ms. Cabot had a handwriting expert swear the signature is genuine. I'm not going to argue with her expert. I'm going to agree with him. The signature may well be a perfect copy of my client's hand. Blair's eyes narrowed a fraction. This was not the direction attacks usually came from. My client didn't sign this. Hallie went on. But let's set the signature aside entirely. Ms. Cabot spent an afternoon proving the signature is real. I'll give it to her. Freely. No fight. Because the signature was never the forgery worth catching. Let's talk about the letters it's written in. She clicked again, and a second image appeared beside the first. A magnified block of the document's typed text. And beside that, a plain certificate from a type foundry. This document is dated the 14th of June, 11 years ago. The body text is set in a typeface called Verity Sans. Verity Sans is not old. Verity Sans was designed, released, and licensed by its foundry, whose sworn records are Defense Exhibit 1B, 4 years after the date printed at the top of this so-called 11-year-old contract. The courtroom was silent in a new way now. Even the people who did not understand fonts understood arithmetic. A man can forge a signature. Hallie said, he cannot print a document in a typeface that will not be invented for another 4 years. This contract was not signed 11 years ago. It was manufactured recently, backdated, and fed to this court as an antique, and it was manufactured, Your Honor, on a computer that keeps records, by a person who did not know that letters have birthdays too. Objection. Blair was up, and the amusement was gone. Foundation. Counsel is testifying, and the foundry certificate is hearsay. It's a business record. Your Honor, self-authenticating under the rule. And I have the Foundry's custodian on standby by video if Ms. Cabot would enjoy hearing a font designer explain her own release date under oath. Hallie did not so much as glance at her. I suspect she would not. Sustained in part, the certificate comes in. Ms. Kingston, lay the rest of your foundation and stop enjoying yourself. Understood. Your Honor. But the corner of her mouth had moved, just slightly, because Hallie Kingston had waited 2 nights and 17 years for this room. And a person is allowed a little joy at work. Gladly. Defense Exhibit 2. Click. A spreadsheet of system logs. Dense and technical filled the screen. 1 row highlighted in yellow. The plaintiff submitted a set of dated design files as proof that he, not my client, invented the Kingston building system. Those files were created on a Kingston Group company laptop. Asset tag on the screen behind me. Company laptops keep access logs. We subpoenaed them Tuesday. They arrived last night. The design files, the plaintiff calls his life's work, were created 11 months ago. At 2 in the morning. From an account that logged in using Mr. Fairchild's own credentials. In a building he no longer worked in. Using a template file named, and I want to read this precisely for the record. Your Honor, backdate _final_2. Somewhere in the gallery, the retired steelworker named Willie made a low sound and pressed his hat to his mouth. He named the file backdate. Hallie repeated, quietly, letting it land. The plaintiff built a time machine out of a laptop and a lie, and he was not even careful enough to hide the label. Your Honor, Blair was up again, and this time there was an edge under the polish. The sound of a professional who has felt the floor tilt and is reaching for a rail. We have had no opportunity to review these logs. We move to exclude. This is trial by ambush. Ms. Cabot. Judge Ramsey did not look up from the exhibit. You entered a backdated contract into my courtroom on Monday. I would think very carefully before saying the word ambush again in front of this jury. She turned a page. The logs came in on a subpoena. Your side was served and did not contest. Overruled. Sit down. Blair sat. It was the first order she had obeyed in 3 days, and the gallery felt the shift in the room, the way you feel a tide decide. Grayson Fairchild had gone the specific gray of a man watching a floor he was standing on turn to water. He leaned toward Blair and whispered something urgent. And for the first time in 3 days, Blair Cabot did not lean back toward him. She had just understood something her client had not. She had understood that the young woman in the cream suit was not a relative who had wandered in. She was a professional, and she had brought receipts. Ms. Kingston. Judge Ramsey said slowly, You said 4 exhibits. I did. Your Honor, Hallie rested her hand on the leather case. And for the first time, she let herself look, just once, at her father, who was sitting, with tears standing in his eyes, and his hand pressed flat against his chest, as if to hold something in. Exhibits 3 and 4 are why I got on the plane. But before I show the court who forged this document, I think the court deserves to know who I am. Because opposing counsel has spent 3 days asking this room to trust a signature. And I'm about to ask it to trust me. My name is Hallie Kingston, she said, and turned so the jury could see her fully. And yes, Kingston, the defendant is my father. A murmur moved through the gallery. Blair Cabot pounced on it before it finished. Your Honor, there it is. Bias. The witness. The attorney. Whatever she is today, is the man's own daughter. Of course, she'll say the documents are forged. This entire performance is a family rescue mission, dressed up as evidence. It would be a rescue mission, Hallie said evenly, if I were asking you to take my word. I'm not. I don't need you to trust a daughter. I've handed this court a Foundry's records and a subpoenaed access log. Those don't love anybody. She let a beat pass. But since Ms. Cabot raised the subject of who I am, let me finish. Because it matters to exactly one thing in this room. She walked back toward the defense table. And she did not look at the judge now. She looked at the jury. The 12 ordinary faces who would decide whether her father died a thief. 17 years ago, I was 10 years old, and I was sitting on a freezing curb outside a gas station with everything I owned in a grocery bag. My mother had died that autumn. Nobody was coming for me. I want you to understand that I remember that curb. I remember the cold of it. And I remember deciding at 10, that this was simply what I was worth. Her voice did not shake. That was somehow the most powerful thing about it. And a man I had never met pulled over and got out of his truck. And instead of standing over me, he crouched down so we were the same height. And he asked me my name, like it was worth knowing. He was the first person in my life who made me feel like a person instead of a problem. In the gallery, grown men were wiping their faces. Willie the steelworker had stopped trying. At the defense table, Solomon Kingston had both hands pressed over his mouth now, and the tears were running freely over his knuckles. And he was not ashamed of a single one of them. Because the daughter he had lied to in order to protect had crossed a continent to protect him instead. And there is no pride in the world like watching the thing you planted grow tall enough to shade you. That man spent 11 months and every favor he had turning a stranger into his daughter. He put me through school. He sat in the front row of every single thing I ever did. And when I told him I wanted to be a lawyer because I was sick of watching people with money crush people without it, he did not tell me it was hard or that the odds were bad. He said, "Good. The world needs more people who make bullies nervous." And he paid for all of it. And he never once, not one time in 17 years, asked me for anything back. She turned then, finally, to face Grayson Fairchild directly. So when a man he trusted like a son forged a contract to steal the one thing my father built to outlast himself, and then hired the most expensive lawyer in the state to call that gentleman a thief in public, on the stand, for 3 days, and here, at last, something entered her voice that had been held back the entire time. Not rage, something colder and far more disciplined than rage. He did not just pick the wrong family. He picked the one homeless kid in America who grew up to prosecute corporate fraud for the federal government. For 6 years, I have put 9 men in your exact suit into federal prison. Mr. Fairchild, I specialize in documents that lie. The courtroom had stopped being a courtroom. It had become the moment before a verdict everyone in the room could already feel. I didn't come here to save an empire, Hallie said, quietly now, to the whole room. Empires I can take or leave. I came here for the man who asked a nobody her name on a freezing night, and I am going to spend the next 20 minutes giving him back his. Judge Ramsey, who had presided over 4 decades of human beings at their worst, looked down at the young woman for a long moment, and something in the old jurist's face had gone soft and certain at the same time. "Ms. Kingston," she said, "show me exhibits 3 and 4. Okay, I am not okay. She carried that freezing curb in her pocket for 17 years and set it down in front of the jury like the last exhibit in the case. And the scariest part is, she is not even angry. She is precise, which is 1,000 times worse for the guy at the other table. 2 exhibits to go. Watch her spring the trap on the man who called her father a thief to his face. Exhibit 3 was the document that ended it, and Hallie had saved it on purpose, because she understood theater after all. Defense Exhibit 3. She said, the plaintiff's own onboarding agreement, signed by Grayson Fairchild on his first day of employment at the Kingston Group, 11 years ago. This one is not forged. Your Honor, this one is real. And we can prove it. Because unlike the plaintiff's contract, it is printed in a typeface that actually existed on the date it was signed. The document filled the screen. Hallie walked to it and put her finger under one clause. Paragraph 9. I'll read it for the record. The employee acknowledges that all intellectual property, systems, methods, and designs of the Kingston Group predate his employment and remain the sole and exclusive property of Solomon Kingston. She turned. Mr. Fairchild signed that. On day 1, 11 years ago, he signed away the entire lawsuit before he ever conceived of it. And then he forgot he had done it. Because men like him sign a great many things and remember only the ones that are convenient. It was Blair Cabot's own line from the second day, turned around and driven home. And the whole room heard it land. Now, let's talk about who built the forgery, Hallie said. And I'd like to call the plaintiff to the stand. What followed was not really a cross-examination. It was a demolition, performed by a professional stake on a structure she had already proven was made of paper. Grayson Fairchild took the stand because refusing would have looked worse, and that was his last good decision of the day. He was smooth for 90 seconds. Then Hallie walked him into the access logs and asked him to explain why his credentials had created his life's work at 2 a.m, 11 months ago. And he said he sometimes worked late. And she asked him how he worked late in a building his keycard was deactivated from, and produced the deactivation record. And Grayson Fairchild began, visibly, to sweat through a very expensive shirt. Hallie was not finished. She walked him back further, to the beginning. Because a pattern is worse than a crime, and she wanted the jury to see the pattern. Before the Kingston Group, Mr. Fairchild, you spent 2 years at a firm called Ashbury Holdings, and before that, a company called Denholm. Both of them, and the public filings are Exhibit 4, ended the same way. A founder pushed out, an intellectual property dispute, a quiet settlement, a younger man walking away with something he did not build. She tilted her head. You don't invent. Mr. Fairchild, you relocate. My father was simply the biggest thing you ever tried to relocate. And the first one who happened to raise a prosecutor. Fairchild said nothing. There was nothing left in the building for him to say. I'd like to read you something else, Hallie said. A statement overheard during a recess in this very trial, by a paralegal who is under subpoena and sitting in the second row. She heard you laughing, Mr. Fairchild, about retiring my father to a beach, and she heard your attorney reply, and I quote, we will get him one, baby, a nice small one. The word baby detonated quietly in the silent courtroom. That's an odd way for a lawyer to speak to her client, Hallie said. Unless the lawyer and the client are not simply a lawyer and a client, unless they are partners in more than the lawsuit. Objection Blair was on her feet, and for the first time, her voice had lost its architecture entirely. To what Hallie asked, mildly, I haven't asked a question yet, but now I will. She turned back to Fairchild. Mr. Fairchild, are you and Ms. Cabot in a personal relationship that predates this lawsuit. Before you answer, remember that hotel records, like laptops and like typefaces, keep dates, and I subpoenaed those too. Grayson Fairchild looked at Blair Cabot. Blair Cabot looked at the exit. And in that one shared look, the whole architecture of the lie showed its load-bearing wall. A raider and his attorney. Lovers, before they were ever anything else, who had cooked up a forged contract over pillows and dressed it in a $2,000 suit and marched it into a court of law to steal an old man's life because they thought no one at the defense table was smart enough to check the phone. "I think," said Judge Ramsey, into the ringing silence, "that this is a good time for opposing counsel to consider whether she has a conflict of interest she failed to disclose to this court." Blair Cabot sat down slowly and did not object to anything ever again. Hallie Kingston's closing argument lasted 4 minutes, and law schools would later teach it. She did not raise her voice. She stood in front of the jury with no notes, because the facts were now so simple that a child could carry them, and she laid them down one at a time, like a woman stacking brick. A contract printed in a font that did not exist yet. Design files built at 2 a.m. from a file named Backdate. An onboarding agreement, signed by the plaintiff's own hand. That gives this entire case away in paragraph 9. A pattern of 3 companies and 3 ruined founders, and a lawyer who called her client baby during a recess. She paused. "The plaintiff asked you to believe that my father, who has spent 40 years being told a handshake from a man like him is worth less, built an empire by stealing from the very man he fed and raised and trusted. The evidence asks you to believe something simpler and older, that a patient man was robbed by someone he loved, and that the robbery was almost perfect, and that almost is the most expensive word in the English language." She looked at Solomon then. "One last time. My father taught me that you build something to outlast you. He built 2 things. He built those towers. And he built me." The plaintiff came for the towers. A small, level smile. He should have checked what else was in the will. The jury was out for 40 minutes. They came back and found for the defendant on every count. The gallery did not cheer, because Judge Ramsey had warned them not to. But 40 years of loyal Kingston employees rose to their feet in total silence as the verdict was read. And a silent room full of standing people is louder than any cheer ever recorded. Willie the steelworker, who had ridden the first Kingston crew, held his hat over his heart and looked at the ceiling and said something under his breath to a man named Solomon he had known when they were both young and broke. And whatever it was, he smiled when he finished saying it. What came after came fast, the way consequences do once the first domino finally goes. Judge Ramsey referred the entire matter to the district attorney before she even left the bench, citing forged evidence, perjury, and fraud upon the court. Grayson Fairchild was arrested 3 weeks later, and the arithmetic that convicted him in civil court did not get any friendlier in criminal court. The pattern Hallie had exposed brought the founders of Denholm and Ashbury out of the woodwork with their own boxes of documents. And the case against him grew a new floor every month. He was sentenced to 9 years. And the beach he had joked about retiring my father to turned out to be a metaphor with no vacation attached. Blair Cabot lost more than the case. Suborning perjury and fabricating evidence are not fields with a licensing pathway back. She was disbarred within the year. In a proceeding where the transcript of that recess, "We will get him one, baby," was read aloud by a disciplinary panel that did not find it charming. The most expensive litigator in the state discovered that a reputation is also a structure, and that hers had been built all along on the same sand as her clients. Her name came off the frosted glass of the firm that had made her a partner. And the associates, who had feared her for a decade, did not send flowers. She and Grayson did not last past his indictment. Lovers who meet by conspiring rarely survive the conspiracy failing. And the last anyone heard. Each was blaming the other in separate filings, which is the closest thing to poetry the legal system offers. The paralegal who had overheard the recess, the one Hallie called from the second row, was subpoenaed, testified with quiet courage, and left that firm the same month. She got a call 2 weeks later from a young attorney opening her own practice, who said she was building a shop where the only thing you had to be loyal to was the truth, and asked if the paralegal wanted in on the ground floor. She said yes before the sentence was finished. And the forged partnership agreement, the beautiful lie that Fairchild had built one floor at a time, was entered permanently into the record with a new label. People's Exhibit 1. In a criminal case, with his name on the wrong side of the verses, Solomon Kingston kept his empire. Every tower, every crew, every name in every lobby stone. But when the reporters swarmed him on the courthouse steps and asked the billionaire how it felt to save his life's work, the old man shook his head and put his arm around the young woman beside him and corrected the record one last time. I didn't save anything today. Solomon said, she did. I just got to watch. 17 years ago, I gave a little girl a name. His voice went, and he let it. In front of every camera in the city. Today, she gave it back to me in front of the whole world. You want to write about an empire? That's the only one that ever mattered. 1 year later, on a freezing Tuesday in December, a black car pulled into a gas station on the edge of the city, and a young woman in a warm coat got out and bought 2 hot chocolates and sat down on the curb by the ice machine. It was the same curb. Hallie Kingston goes back every year. On the anniversary of the night, a stranger crouched down and asked her name. Some years, she goes alone. This year, her father came with her, slower than he used to be, and lowered himself down onto the cold concrete beside her, with a grunt and a joke about his knees. And the two of them sat where it all started, and drank hot chocolate, and watched their breath, and did not say very much. Because the people who love you most are the ones you can be quiet next to. The Kingston Group is bigger than ever. A 4th tower rising downtown. But Solomon has been letting go of the reins one finger at a time. Because he finally has someone to let go to. Hallie did not take over the company. That was never who she was. Instead, she used her share of it to open something of her own. A legal practice with a strange business model. A firm that takes the cases nobody can pay for. Founders getting squeezed out of what they built. Old people being lied out of their homes. Families staring down expensive lawyers across a table with no one on their side. Hallie Kingston and her small, fierce staff. Including one loyal paralegal who once told the truth from a second row. Stand on the other side of that table now. For free. And expensive lawyers across the state have learned to check the font. She named the firm the Josephine Project, after the woman she never met. The wife whose last words to a heartbroken young contractor were, "Build something that outlasts you." Solomon cried when he saw the name on the door. He is not a man who has ever been ashamed of crying, which is one of the 10,000 reasons his daughter turned out the way she did. On the wall of Hallie's office, in the center spot, where the diploma should be, hangs a framed receipt from an all-night diner, 17 years old, for 2 orders of pancakes that a sentimental man carried in his wallet all those years and gave to his daughter the day she passed the bar. Grayson Fairchild files appeals from prison. They keep failing on the arithmetic. And on that freezing curb, 1 year after the courtroom, Solomon Kingston bumped his paper cup gently against his daughter's and said the only toast he ever gives. The same one every year. To the best deal I ever made. Hallie leaned her head on the old man's shoulder, the way she has since she was 10, and did not correct him. Because for once in his careful, honest life, Solomon Kingston had the numbers exactly right. So tell me something. Because I read every single comment. Who is the person who crouched down to your level when you were at your lowest and made you feel like somebody? And have you ever gotten to pay it back? Comment their name and where you are watching from. Share this with the parent who chose you, or the kid you chose. And subscribe. Because stories where love turns out to be the strongest evidence in the room are exactly what I bring here every single week. Real quick before you go, because I am genuinely wrecked. This man kept a diner receipt for pancakes in his wallet for 17 years. Not the towers, not the $1 billion. A receipt from the night a scared kid became his kid. And she spent a whole law degree and a career hunting fraud just to walk into one courtroom and hand him his own name back. Blood makes relatives. Showing up on a freezing curb makes family. Drop a like if Dad, I'm Here wrecked you too, because I am fully on the floor.